the American War of Independence. Voltaire said, "The entire Europe was enlightened due to the flames of fire created in the American forest." As said by Chester Bolt, the first revolt in the world against imperialistic country. The American Freedom War laid down a new thought that the state could be ruled without a king. Discovery of new land. The continent of America was separated from the world for a number of centuries due to the Atlantic Ocean in the east and the Pacific Ocean in the west. Due to the efforts of European land discoverers Christopher Columbus, John Cabot, and Amerigo Vespucci in the 15th century, the northeast and the middle parts of the American continent came to light for the first time. Large numbers of people from Spain, England, France, Netherlands, Portugal, and other countries of Europe rushed to the newly discovered land of America to establish colonies. From 1606 to 1732 AD, England established 13 colonies on the eastern coastal region of America. Virginia was their first and foremost colony. Various kinds of people settled in the American colonies: farmers without land, traders, citizens with a desire to live a free life. People who were exhausted due to religious and political tyranny rushed to America to settle there. A new mixed society consisting of various types of people from Europe was formed, and that society was known as the American Society. The British colonies in America. People who came from England frequently to America formed their own colonies. In the beginning, there were many problems which were solved at the local level. The Red Indian Revolts, America's native people, revolts with other neighboring English colonies, strife on the borderline. Various deals were to be finalized regarding agriculture and the trading sectors, and they also had to be controlled. A suitable administrative system was to be set up for the colonies. In due course, statutory organizations were formed and ruled out a tax system and other bills and laws after mutual discussions with their representatives. The colonies were anxious to take the benefit of the natural resources of America. They never liked others' restrictions. England, the motherland's control over the colonists, was very nominal in the beginning. Restrictions over the activities of the colonists. England and France had a war on the problem of the ownership of the Ohio and North American states. The 7 Years' War, 1756 AD to 1763 AD, was fought between America and France. The war ended under the Paris Treaty. England gained Canada and the Appalachian Mountain Range along with the territorial region of the Mississippi River from France. England took the decision to keep these regions reserved for the Red Indians to hunt in temporarily. Colonists desiring to advance beyond the west of the Appalachian Mountain were restricted. Consequently, many of the colonists were angry. France was defeated in the 7 Years' War, so the colonists became fearless of their attack on them. In the same way, they had no need for protection and guidance by England. The colonists developed the feeling that they became independent of their own administration. Due to these reasons, the colonists got ready to revolt. New taxes and other restrictions. England became financially chaotic due to the 7 Years' War. The British Parliament in 1764 AD, in order to compensate for the losses in the war from the colonists, passed the bill named the Sugar Act. Sugar, silk, coffee, alcohol, etc. were charged taxes under this act while importing them into America. Severe restrictions were imposed upon toll. So, the commercial sector people were fearful in the colonies due to this act. The 1765 Stamp Act also proved to be very strict and harsh. By this act, tax was rigorously charged on newspaper, court stamp papers, insurance agreements, documents of the ships faring to and fro, licenses, and playing cards too. Due to intensive tax imposing by the British Parliament on the colony people, there was a huge tide of wrath in America. Under the name Sons of Liberty, the colonists formed an organization and rejected disdainfully the Stamp Act by criticizing it severely. They began to boycott British goods. Breach of law activities in the colonies began. The colonists' protest was so powerful that the British Parliament had to cancel the Stamp Act. In 1765, Currency Act, Belating Act, etc., and such tyrannical acts were imposed on the colonies. Passing the Declaratory Act in 1747, England threatened the colonies that the British Parliament has the right to form laws and impose unlimited rights over them. On the contrary, the colonists resorted to insisting that imposing tax on them means denying their rights to individual freedom or on their representatives. Their pleader, James Otis, said, "It's a great tyranny to impose tax without representation." In 1767, the British Parliament passed the Townshend Act, by which they imposed tax on the import of tea, sugar, paper, colour, lead, etc. Again, the colonists protested and agitated, and the British Parliament had to bend and surrender. The East India Company of England was in a financial crisis. In order to save the company, England passed one more act in 1773, and according to this act, the East India Company had monopoly in trading tea with America. But the Americans boycotted tea, and instead of tea drinking, in America, coffee drinking had become the indication of patriotism. This event is known as the Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party is the tentative reason for the American War of Independence. The colonists were severely discontented due to the unjustifiable tax imposing on tea. 3 ships full of tea boxes were due to arrive at the port of Boston. The ship, Dartmouth, was set at the post on the 27th of November, 1773. The colonists asked the ship to go back, but this demand was rejected. 8,000 Red Indians were gathered at Old South Church. By making well-disciplined groups, the people embarked the ship at night. The same night, 342 tea boxes were thrown into the sea water. The cost of the tea was calculated to be £18,000. This happened on the 16th of December, 1773. In American history, this is known as the Boston Tea Party. Unless tax on tea is paid, the British government declared that the port of Boston would be closed for trading. Consequently, discontent arose awfully, and finally, the American War of Independence was declared due to the Boston Tea Party. Shadow of war. England had sent some of its troops to America. New York was its central place. Military force was also called at Boston. The prime point of their attention was the presence of British soldiers. According to England, the British military force was sent to America in order to protect the lines of control. But the colonists presumed that England wanted to keep them in control by sending the force to America. By the appearance and the dressing of the soldiers of England, the colonists called them redcoats. Invariably, there were conflicts between the British soldiers and the colonists. At Boston on the 5th of March 1770, 5 colonists were killed by the British soldiers in such a conflict. It was termed as the Boston Assassination. Delegates' conferences of colonists. The colonists were united against the tyrannical rule imposing taxes, as well as the unjustifiable restrictions by England on them. The feeling of breaking of war against the British rule soon rose among the colonists. They realized that they had to act unitedly. At Philadelphia, on the 5th of September 1774, under the presidency of Benjamin Franklin, the first conference for all the colonies was called. This conference is recognized as the First Philadelphia Congress. The representatives gathered there made a slogan, "Life, liberty and property are our birthrights." The colonists were appealed to prepare themselves with weapons by erecting their own troops. England's Emperor George III was requested to cancel the unjust tax on the colonists, but the emperor denied their request. He ordered his military to break their revolt. Consequently, the conflict rose and there was a clash between the British soldiers and the colonists at Lexington, and the American War of Liberty started to take place. On the 10th of May 1775, the Second Conference at Philadelphia was held under the presidentship of John Hancock. George Washington was appointed as the Army General of the organized troops of soldiers. The colonies were instructed to be alert and ready for battle. The president of this conference, John Hancock, declared that our goal is justifiable and we are totally united, not as the live slaves, but we would prefer to die as free mankind. Lastly, England declared war against 13 colonies on the 23rd of August 1775. On the 4th of July 1774, the colonists held the Third Conference at Philadelphia. In this conference, the Freedom Manifesto was declared. All relations with England were curtailed. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson made a draft of the American Freedom Manifesto. It was as follows: "These truths are self-evident. All are equal. Right from birth. Life, freedom, and happiness in life are their own rights given by God. And the government rule prevails only to protect and prevent all such rights." For that reason, a meeting at Paris was held in 1783 for a truce agreement. After signing the truce agreement, America was declared to be a free nation. Consequently, the United States of America, USA, came into existence. Effects of the War on Freedom. It was for the first time in the history of the world that a democratic government in the form of the United States came into being. George Washington took oath as the first president of USA. The American War of Liberty proved that every man has a right to revolt against injustice and the right to freedom. Many wars were fought for the original rights of human beings in the world. Many countries and nations followed the ideal of the written Constitution of America. A number of nations in the world took inspiration from the American War of Freedom to establish democracy. England had to lose 13 colonies, and that was a great blow to them. England had to follow a liberal policy regarding the colonies. The French economy became very critical due to the participation in the American Freedom War. The French warriors who took part in the American Freedom War made a propaganda of democratic thoughts and the importance of democracy after returning to their homeland, and hence created a background for the French Revolution in 1789. The French Revolution is supposed to be the result of the American political revolution. This American Revolution established an everlasting impact on world history. George Washington, 1732 to 1799 AD. George Washington was a great landlord of Virginia. He had taken an active part in the 7 Years' War as well as the wars with the French and the Red Indians. He was appointed as the Chief of Army for the colony's composite troops. He was the leader of the American Freedom War and became the first president of USA. He politely declined becoming the president of the USA for the third time after consecutively holding the post, and this formed a good example. He developed the judiciary and the economic system of America, a powerful country in the world. It is said that he was the first in war activities, the first in peaceful America, and also the first in the hearts of the citizens of America. Thomas Paine and impact of his writings. Thomas Paine, the revolutionary thinker of England, expressed his revolutionary thoughts in his books, Common Sense and Rights of Man. He expressed that the king's power is not godly. When he has unlimited power, the king becomes a dictator. Thomas was always against the rule of a king and his kingdom. The king is a crafty man with a crown, he always asserted. Thomas Paine was the first thinker in the world asserting human rights in world history. He made a scientific interpretation of human rights in his book, Rights of Man. He said that the origin of human rights is in nature and that the people should form a government to protect human rights. There should not be monopoly to form a government, because in doing so, there is no need for heredity. People who loved freedom took inspiration from his book. Great work of the thinkers. The thinkers played a great role in performing American Revolution. John Locke, Milton, Thomas Paine of England, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau of France, Samuel, Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, etc. of America made great impact on the people of America by asserting natural rights of mankind and freedom of man, and created a great background to the American Freedom War.